Victorian authorities say tighter restrictions could be on the cards. It comes after revelations the Andrews government was warned about problems with its hotel quarantine program. On day one. Joining me now, Sky News host and News Corp columnist Peta Credlin. Peter, great to see you tonight. Gee, that was a big story today on the front of the Fairfax papers, suggesting that the government had been warned on day one that they shouldn't use security guards, that they should adopt what the other states adopted, and that is ADF personnel and, of course, police to look after these people who are in quarantine.
And look, as someone who's worked inside government, when one department starts to leak against another, and the reporter who had the exclusive in the Fairfax papers had seen the emails, between the health officials and other parts of the public service, that tells you very seriously there's a lot of backside covering going on and there's likely to be more revelation. So they have had enough. Clearly, senior parts of the public service in Victoria, with being blamed for something they had warned would be a consequence. They weren't far wrong. And one of those emails was really telling to me, because officials were saying a day before the system rolled out back in March that we must have police in every single one of these quarantine hotels on a 24/7 basis. That didn't happen. And I have to say, as a Victorian, if it had happened, if they'd taken heed of that request way back in March, I suspect we wouldn't be where we are now.
How's the mood, Peter? I mean, have you got cabin fever? I detect a sense of palpable anger. People are very unimpressed, and I'm hearing even Labor Party figures condemning the way in which this has been handled.
I suspect the Premier's going into an underground car park at his office and going home and straight in, and even the dog doesn't want to come near him, because, you know, he would be the most unpopular man in Victoria. And it's not just people like, you know, me who are bitching and moaning that I'm stuck at home, but for coming into the studio. It's people that are losing their jobs. It's businesses that had barely survived the first lockdown and had opened up again. A lot of these employees, as we know, are not necessarily eligible, haven't been casuals for long enough to trigger a JobKeeper. I know quite a lot of them are foreign students, and they're getting no support whatsoever. Yes, they've got a choice to go home, but they live on, many of them, support from their businesses. They just can't keep going. I mean, it is really, really tough. And it's winter in Melbourne too, right? So it's bleak anyway. Everyone's mood's low. The AFL at the moment is pretty rubbish compared to the NRL in terms of quality. It's all going to hell in a handcart.
Peter, the Labor Party are at it again. You've got Anthony Albanese trying to rein in Joel Fitzgibbon and Shane Newman and Anthony Chisholm about this Acland mine. There's fresh calls for the Palaszczuk government to reverse its current status, and that is it won't, despite the fact that it's been given the approval from the Court of Appeal. Now, it is in the High Court. It is in the High Court, and the Palaszczuk government are saying they won't approve this mine. There's 580 jobs at stake here. They won't approve it until the court process is exhausted. But as Acland keeps saying, well, that could go on for another 20 years. It's already been 13 years. As I said, this is a sort of a left of the Labor Party versus right of the Labor Party, and we saw this in last year's federal election when, of course, we had Bill Shorten saying one thing in St Kilda and another thing in Gladstone.
And we saw after the election, within a matter of days, the Palaszczuk government read the writing, the message, that when Shorten was shot down over the issue of coal in Queensland and lost, by the Monday or the Tuesday, Palaszczuk very quickly decided to move on the Adani mine issue. This will be about preferences. And I don't think, even if there was a High Court decision saying that the mine should open up this, the new expanded component before October 31, the government will not move on it. The government is desperate for the Greens' preferences. This is a government trying for its third term. This is a government that can only really survive by hanging on to seats in inner city Brisbane with the Greens' help. They don't give a bugger about the rest of Queensland, let's be really honest. You're a local, you know exactly what I'm saying there. So they will sacrifice the coal votes outside of Brisbane to hold on to preferences inside Brisbane, and this is what it's coming down to. But interestingly, you know, I had Stephen Conroy on my show saying that, you know, Anthony Albanese is pro-coal, or certainly said some good comments about coal. No one believes that from Labor. because they say exactly what people want to hear going into an election, and on the other side do something absolutely different. And that's where I think they have a credibility problem. Joel Fitzgibbon knows that. Anthony Chisholm knows that, and that's why they are speaking out against pretty much the position of their leader.
It's interesting. It's interesting, Peter. I had Peter Beattie on my show last night, and he was fairly critical of Anastasia Palaszczuk. She gave him a bit of a backhander on Sunday. He came out in the Sunday Mail and gave his 11-point plan to how he would fix Queensland in a post-COVID environment. And she said, oh, he lives in New South Wales. We don't really care what he has to say. Now, he said anyone handing out backhanders to former premiers, former prime ministers, need to be a little bit careful, although he did say he thought she was still the slight favourite to win on October 31. No love lost there between Beattie and her, is there?
No, there's not. It's interesting. I think she is, in part, sparring for a fight with almost anyone. We saw that going on with her and Premier Berejiklian over the border issue and beyond, because she needs to act and look tough. She hasn't got her henchwoman in Trad immediately in Arena Sanctum, although I think Trad would be back if they were to win. There's no doubt about that, given her block of support in the caucus. So she's got to present as being, tough and having the mettle needed to get Queensland out of the looming recession. We'll all go through it. Every state will go through it, some worse than others. And this will be the challenge for her, is to demonstrate that she's got what it takes to win the election in October, but also to look after Queensland for the next term. And that's part of the audition she goes through every day.
What did you make today, Peter, of the Palace letters released after 45 years, which essentially showed that Sir John Kerr, did not consult the Queen before the sacking of Gough Whitlam?
Well, when I was at university, I wrote a number of papers about the dismissal, as you do when you're a law student and you love your politics as well. And my first date with my husband, I'll let you in a secret, all we talked about was the dismissal, because he's as much of a boffin on it as I am. So I found it fascinating. It was a red letter day for me. I was listening to a couple of people on radio this afternoon, aghast, shocked, how terrible it was that the Governor-General didn't consult the Queen before he sacked the Prime Minister. And that just shows they don't understand the whole issue, because if he had discussed it with the Queen, that would be a huge issue. It's not appropriate that he discusses it with the Queen. But for a long time there had been this conspiracy theory from a range of people on the left, and certainly a lot of the Republican movement types, that there must have been some involvement of the Crown, and if there was, if it could be proven, it would help bring Australians over the line to say we've got to scrap the monarchy and we've got to have a republic. Well, this has proven that our system works. It proved that the Queen understood very much the constitutional remit that she had, and it was not to be involved in the Australian constitutional arrangements as per our constitution, and that we are independent because an Australian made the decision to sack an Australian Prime Minister on Australian soil without interference from London.
All right, well, before we go, I see the Chinese have had another crack at us over our offer to repatriate some Hong Kong people. The hypocrisy at the moment in the Australia-Chinese relations is extraordinary. Where's this going to end, do you think? I mean, you've sat around the table with prime ministers and heads of state from China. You know how these things operate, the diplomacy sort of nuances, if you like. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any diplomacy at all, does there?
Well, you're all now hearing and seeing publicly what was known privately for so long in Canberra. I mean, we've got to work our way through this. I mean, all the things you're hearing about cybersecurity, I knew in the time I worked for Tony Abbott, but we still conducted free trade negotiations with them in order to do the right thing by our farmers and our mineral producers and our higher education entities. So you can have a relationship with them. You just got to know what you're dealing with and take the rose-coloured glasses off. And that's, I think, what we did. Now, I'm pretty hawkish on China. I would be concerned for our longer term strategy if we were to reduce our defence budget or somehow kowtow and not speak our mind. Finally, I think we're doing that very much publicly. I think standing up for the Hong Kongers and giving them visa options here in Australia too is smart. I do want, and I've said this from day one though, someone at ASIO to run the ruler over every single one of those people we allow to stay in Australia, to make sure they really are the ones we want to protect and not some Chinese Trojan horse getting some sort of anchor in the country. So that'll be the challenge.